a youth-funded nonprofit organization, and they work with a global network from all around the world. And yeah, many members focus on the Arctic and so many other issues we find important, and it's a really nice network to be a part of. As well as Students and Ice is one of our organizers. I'm a Students and Ice alumni, so I'm really happy to be working with them again. There are an award-winning organization, and they focus on the polar regions. So they have expeditions to the Arctic and to the Antarctic, and they aim to teach young people about these regions.
And before we get started, here's our agenda. First, we're going to give an introduction to the Arctic and Arctic science. We're going to move into resiliency storytelling, calls to action, and let's save your questions till the end so that we can have some questions. You can interact with this event using Slido. You can navigate to www.slido.com and use our event code 93617 to answer and to ask and answer questions and interact with our moderators. And you can see there in the chat is a link to get to Slido and our event code. Again, it's 93617. Our first 5 minutes are going to be spent in a rapid question answer section on how well do you know the Arctic? Remember to go to Slido to answer these questions. First question, approximately how many people live in the Arctic? We have answer choice A, 800,000 people, answer choice B, 2 million people, answer choice C, 4 million people, and answer choice D, 5 million people. Mark your answers in Slido. Again, our event code is 93617. So if you answered C, you are correct, 4 million people. So according to the Arctic Human Development Report, there are 4 million people in the Arctic, and settlement areas divided between the 8 Arctic countries: Canada, USA, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Denmark. People have actually lived in the Arctic for 200,000 years, and there are 40 different ethnic groups in this region.
Right now, I'm sending live from Nuuk, which is in Greenland, and that's the capital. And I want you guys to try to guess what the hottest average temperature in Nuuk, Greenland is during the summertime. Afterwards, I will show you outside of my window so you can get a feeling. But you can either choose A, which is 0 degrees Celsius, B, 5 degrees Celsius, C, 10 degrees Celsius, or D, 20 degrees Celsius. And again, you just answer in Slido what you think.
Got a lot of different responses coming in.
I remember many people often don't believe that there is even summer in Greenland, or they think we have snow all year round. So I'm excited to see your answers. Yeah, so 10 degrees Celsius is the hottest temperature on average. This is Nuuk, as you can see here, but I will also show you outside my window. Yeah, you've caught me on a sunny day, and it's actually really nice out. Usually we have around 10 degrees, but it feels a lot warmer. My family is right now in South Greenland, and they have a lot hotter temperatures. Well, maybe not a lot, but about 20 degrees is actually normal. during the time in June and July and August. And with the climate crisis happening recently, also the temperatures have been rising, and it's been quite noticeable actually.
Next question, which of these plant species would you not be able to find in the Arctic? Answer choices are A, blueberries, B, cotton grass, C, poppies, and D, strawberries. Which one are you not going to find? Lots of different responses for this one as well. People have answered for each one. So the answer is D, strawberries, which is actually kind of contentious. People are thinking it's between poppies and strawberries. And it's actually starting to change right now because temperatures are warming. People are now able to grow strawberries in Greenland, but there aren't any native strawberry plants in the Arctic. There are blueberries, also called bilberries. There is cotton grass, one of the most widespread flowering plants and important Inuit culture, has also been used as candle wicks, which is really interesting. And there are poppies. It's a symbolic flower in Norway.
So now you know that we do have some summers, but another thing that not everybody knows, maybe you people that know things about the Arctic knows, but we have something that calls the midnight sun. And I want you guys to guess how long does it typically last in Greenland. So do you think the midnight sun starts from late April to late August, from June to July, a few weeks in June, or all the way from August to September?
While we're waiting for responses to come in, I would also like to note that people can register and join this event while it's live. People can join at any time, so feel free to share it.
So the answer is actually two of them. So you got a 50% chance now. It can start all the way from late April to late August in some places of Greenland, usually more in the northern places because you are closer to, how you can say, like the polar region, and then from around June, July down south. And midnight sun is an interesting thing. When I was little, I got so confused because first you have the dark winters and then suddenly you have sun all the time and you don't want to go to bed when the sun is out and your friends is out playing. Now I still love it. It's a bit difficult with sleeping schedule and stuff like that, but the midnight sun in the Arctic is absolutely beautiful, and I'm very lucky to have seen it, I feel like. Yes, now we had our little myth busting session. So we're gonna move on and talk a bit more about our stories and what we know about the Arctic. And as you can see here, we have Arctic Science with Dr. Caroline Koch, I believe it's pronounced. She's a polar specialist at WWF UK, and she completed her PhD in permafrost research at the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research in Germany, focusing on biogeochemistry of small river catchment in the Canadian Arctic. With background in geography and glaciology, her science has taken her places, very many different places on Earth, such as Iceland, Sweden, Lapland, Svalbard, and the Canadian Arctic and Antarctica. At WWF UK, Caro is managing a wide portfolio of polar conservation grants, supporting the climate and polar work, and translating new science finding into exciting and powerful stories for advocacy, fundraising teams, media, and WWF supporters. And remember, you can still interact with us and ask questions. We will be able to answer them later on. And you just put the questions in on Slido still. So let's hear it from her.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm just trying to share my screen in a second. So I hope you can see it. Can you just give me, yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm Caro, and yeah, I work for WWF, and I feel very honored to be part of this webinar. And yeah, I can really relate to this feeling of the midnight sun. I lived 1 year in Iceland, and it's not as sunny as it gets in Greenland, I suppose, but it's just like a special feeling, and you suddenly have a lot of energy and no urge to sleep anymore. So it's something I can really relate to. And I've been really lucky to have spent a lot of time in the Arctic. So today I'm going to give you an introduction to climate change. So we all know it in the news, it's all over. And we just start looking at let me just see if this actually works. Yes, we're just looking at a map of surface temperature change. So I'm going to start the animation soon, but the more red the areas, the warmer they get, and the more blue, the colder. So I'm just starting the animation of temperature change across the world in the 1800s. So now we're in the 1900s, approaching the 50s, the 60s. Now we're in the 90s, 2000s, and 2019. So you see a very clear trend here. And bear in mind, this is only compared to the 1950s to 1980s reference period. So if you would compare it to pre-industrial times, it would be like the complete map would be very, very red. And something else you notice is the north. So you see it very red high up in the Arctic. And this is actually something that, yeah, that is called Arctic amplification. So the warming is amplified in the Arctic. So the warming is actually 2 to 3 times higher than for the rest of the world. And this has tremendous effects on the ecosystems, on people. And it's not only ice. So of course there's the Greenland ice sheet, but then there are land regions as well. That are underlain by permafrost, so permanently frozen ground that is thawing more and more. And then there's sea ice in the ocean, floating on the ocean and also changing. And I'm going to take you through all of these changes and just give you some scientific background on what we are seeing there, because it's not only the temperatures we are aware of when we talk of global warming, like there are other signs in nature that we can observe and that we can measure and where we see drastic change. So I'm just showing you an animation of sea ice starting in the 1980s, and the more white, like clear white the ice, the older it is. So as I start the animation, I want you to focus on these very white areas, because this ice is multi-year ice, so older sea ice. So we are in the 1990s now. And you can see it contracting and expanding. So the sea ice minimum is usually recorded at the end of September, and then the maximum in March. So over the summer it's retreating, and then in the winter it's increasing again. And as you look at the white areas, they decrease drastically, but also the whole extent is decreasing. So this animation stops in 2019, and we'll see what year this year will bring. But now I'm just gonna, like, if you just focus on the outline here, and I'm just gonna show you the comparison, how it was in the 1980s. You see a drastic change over the past 40 years. And of course, this affects wildlife, it affects people, it affects weather patterns. One of the most prominent examples are probably polar bears. So they rely on seals for hunting, and seals rely on sea ice. And as the ice is retreating, bears can really struggle to find food and are found to come into communities more. So it's one of the signs that nature sends how it's different. Moving on to land, so also background, you can see behind me a picture from that field season. So this is the coastline, and here's the ocean. So permafrost, I mentioned in the beginning, is defined as ground that remains below 0 degrees for at least 2 years. But with climate change, with the climate crisis happening right now, it's thawing more and more. And actually, so we take these measurements along this erosion feature that is all transported into the ocean. And partly in this area in the Canadian Arctic, we measured 20 meters of retreat in one summer. And there are areas where you can measure even a higher rate of retreat. So it's tremendous, and you go back to the same site, and sometimes you don't believe your data because you feel, oh, well, but I was just standing there, like where there's ocean right now. So like there must be something wrong, but it's not. It's measurements that show us the drastic change. And something else to be aware with permafrost is that as climate is warming and permafrost is thawing, it releases carbon dioxide and methane, so greenhouse gas emissions, because there's a lot of organic material stored in these soils that were locked over hundreds of years. And now with the thawing of permafrost, these greenhouse gases can get released and even accelerate warming more, and then more permafrost thawing, more greenhouse gas release. So it's one of these so-called positive feedback loops, which are not positive in that sense. But of course, it has big impacts on infrastructure. So along coastlines, like houses, like whole settlements needing to resettle because the sea is just eating the houses. Also infrastructure like railways and streets are impacted by this permafrost thaw. And probably the most recent example, the collapse of permafrost in Siberia, where there was a power plant that spilled a lot of oil into like a river system. So this is also linked to permafrost. So it is, it is a tremendous impact. And as you learned in the beginning with the myths and how many people live in the Arctic, it's not disconnected. It's not just left to be alone. Like there are people living there, and these impacts affect everybody. So now we're moving on to the land, finally looking at land ice. So this is a glacier in Greenland. And this is an event called, so this is the size of Manhattan. So it's incredibly big, but actually the ice mass is bigger than Manhattan is tall. And this is a time-lapse event of a glacier that is exiting into the ocean, and it's called a calving event. So when the glacier front is breaking off. So this duration of this event was 90 minutes, where the size of Manhattan just broke off and went into the ocean. So this is from a movie called Chasing Ice, where they wanted to measure this extreme impact that climate change has. And you see an aerial view now. So this area retreated within 100 years. And then this area, even larger, only took 10 years. So you really see this massive increase of climate change and of impacts in the Arctic. But of course, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay there. The impacts affect all of us. And you can think of the Arctic as the thermostat of the entire globe. So if we break the Arctic, we break our climate in the mid-latitudes too. And we already see more heat waves that become more frequent and more intense. And another very important impact, like more extreme rainfall as well, flooding. So these are some impacts of the weather system because everything is interconnected. But something else from the land ice that is melting into the ocean, of course, it leads to sea level rise. So this is an animation of rising sea levels from the 1880s up until now. And yeah, so it's rising, and you also see this acceleration of sea level rise. And this is something that just accelerated because of increased climate change as well. But it will also continue, like sea levels will continue to rise because the oceans are expanding with the warming as well. So now we've had so far, like since the 1880s, a sea level rise of 22 centimeters, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it doesn't rise equally across the world. So there are regions where you see a sea level rise of 2 meters even. And some regions there might be less, but it's something, yeah. And if you're a low-lying island, even 22 centimeters make a big difference. So this is what I want you to keep in mind. The Arctic is not only ice, but it's changing drastically. And also what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay there. And it's really important to draw attention. The Arctic is at the front line of climate change. So with that, I want to pass on to the other speakers, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing some Arctic stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Koch. It's staggering to see the science in stark graphics like that. It was really amazing and great to have that background of the Arctic. And with that, I would love to move on to my co-host, Iluna. Iluna was born and raised in Greenland and has always been very close to nature. She's now 19 years old, studying in the Netherlands and the United World College. Since early 2019, she started doing climate activism and has made some climate marches, participating in many media projects to spread the message. Iluna is a Students on Ice alumni and has worked on various projects in the field of climate activism, biodiversity, and plastic pollution. She is currently busy working on several projects that will hopefully happen in Nuuk. Again, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, you can head over to Slido to ask them. With that, the next couple minutes are yours, Iluna.
Thank you. I'll try to see if I can share my screen. And there we go. Can you see it? Yes, okay. So yes, thank you for the introduction. My name is Iluna Sørensen. I'm Greenlandic in Nuuk, and I was born and raised in Nuuk. Yeah, so I started doing climate activism, I would say probably around start 2019, as mentioned before, but I think it all kind of started when I moved away from home, from my parents' home. It's a 7 minutes bus ride, but I felt like it was away from home because suddenly I had the responsibility to take care of myself and to make my own choices. And I thought, well, I can try to be more sustainable. So I tried to do that. And I went down to the shop with the little money I had and said, okay, I'm gonna try to be a vegan now. And I realized how expensive that was. But I tried to work in other ways to just be more sustainable in my own way with the things I buy and everything like that. So when I started in my school, I was so lucky to become a part of a place we called like the masterclass. And it was a place where we had sustainability as a focus. So it was a bunch of people from my own class and some from the other classes. And we got together and started working on sustainability in a broad form as sustainability is. And we got so lucky to link up with some people from Denmark, a class from Denmark, and they visited us in Greenland, and suddenly we had the responsibility to share our story and how our community works and how like sustainability works in our country. And it was really new because living one place and then suddenly have to explain it to somebody else, you really realize how much you actually don't know and how many things there's to learn still, even when it's your own home. So we started doing that, and we got to see a lot of organization in my hometown, and I learned so much actually. With that group, we also organized 2 climate marches, so Fridays for Future, and that happened first in March and then in May. And it was a really nice outcome. We had the message on a Sunday evening. Somebody asked us if we wanted to be a part of doing this. And on the same Friday, we had the whole thing organized, because just being young and motivated, and we got this done. And our whole school went down and marched around the city. And actually, we also got to organize in other parts of Greenland. So in South Greenland, in Qaqortoq, and in northern part of Greenland, in Sisimiut. And it was really great to see. Suddenly being 17 and still new to the school and stuff like that, you suddenly had a voice and you were able to make a change in your own community that you didn't feel like you had the power to do before. And it was such eye-opening for myself, at least. We got a lot of media attention, and I was really excited about it. So we made interviews, we talked to the radio, with the television, and just spread the message about how we didn't feel satisfied with the way things were now, and we wanted to see change for the better. So we made the other climate marches once again, and with the same group that had organized the climate marches, we were so lucky to go to Denmark, which is the picture where there's a lot of green, and got to know so much more about European sustainability and how the climate works there. And that was also eye-opening, because you realize you don't actually know that much about other places sometimes. So that's some things I really wish that people know, is that first you got to start small, you got to start with yourself. I wanted to become vegan, but then I realized that's probably not the best to do when you live in the Arctic and everything has to be transported, and perhaps much better to eat the fish I caught the weekend before. But I tried my best. And just starting small with your own community and your own school and own environment, you are able to do a lot of big changes. And also that you need to adapt to your own environment. As I said, I was following the, you can say, mainstream way of being sustainable, which did not fit the Arctic at all, because it's such a unique place and it doesn't really fit. Like, you don't have one formula for how to be sustainable all around the world. And I think that is something that's really important to remember. Well, going back to what we learned from the experiences, we went to Denmark. We learned a lot about forest and trees and farming, which I never heard before because we don't have any trees. And it was a really meaningful experience. And with that, we also had some media attention. So I was able to talk with some politicians with my classmates and giving them like a heads up on saying, remember us, Greenland and the Arctic is there, and we do feel the effects of climate crisis already. And that it is important to bring in the youth, because this is going to be our future. With all this going on in a very short amount of time, this was just happening in like 3 months, I think, of the spring of 2019. I was so lucky to be accepted to Students and Ice, where I went the same summer. And that's the picture in the middle where you have me and my friend Nuyana in the middle. She's also from Greenland, and Liliana from Chicago. And we had this beautiful midnight sun in the background. And Students and Ice was such a meaningful experience for me. I got to learn so much not only about like the Arctic in general, but how different people are taking action in their own way and in their own environment. And I got a lot of experience on how I could do moving forward, and I got a lot of network with Arctic Youth Network and much more. And I think this network have brought me to this webinar today, for example. So I'm really, really grateful for that experience. Afterwards, creating that network and working together with so many people, there were so many projects happening afterwards as well. After the trip, I went back home for a couple of weeks, back to Nuuk, and then I moved to the Netherlands. And this was the first time probably I moved away from home, and not just a 7 minutes bus ride away from home, but actually like 3 plane rides. And it's been a crazy experience, but it's been super nice. And I've been so lucky to be able to visit the Arctic because of the projects that I've started. In November of 2019, me and Nuyana actually again went to Canada and was a part of Arctic Youth Camp, which was also like a event, I think you can call it, organized by Students on Ice and the ambassadors of the Danish ambassadors, I believe it's called. And we got to learn about how to start up projects and focus on our own communities. And that's something that I keep coming back to. You really have to start focusing on yourself, probably the first thing, because that's what you have to live with, and start with your own community and what you know as home. And then after that, it will grow. If you're passionate about it and if you want to see change, just starting with yourself, it will work. And of course, again, then adapting to your own environment, because there's not one formula as I thought there were. But yeah, so that was one of the projects. They're happening in November, but also so many other doors open for me. And I haven't really found like one thing I'm super interested in. Because climate action is a broad like word, and you can focus on so many different things. So everything from plastic pollution to biodiversity, I've worked a bit with until now, and I'm still finding my way on what I find the most important and what to fight for. And I think it's a super interesting experience to try out a lot of different things. In January, I was invited by WWF Denmark to join a conference in Copenhagen, focusing on biodiversity. And I joined not knowing a lot about it. I knew some things about the climate crisis, and I knew some things about the Arctic because that's what I've grown up with. And then I joined and learned a lot about like biodiversity, and my eyes opened once again, as you do keep learning as you go. And now I'm actually working on trying to organize a conference here in my hometown, also focusing on biodiversity. Because as grateful as I was to participate in Copenhagen, I was the only representative. And I feel like the Arctic and Greenland and the youth in the Arctic should have a much bigger voice in this whole debate of climate crisis and biodiversity and every other issue there is, because we are the ones that are being influenced a lot. As Caro said, with 2 to 3 times more than other regions. And it's really important that when it's us that it's influencing, we should be able to have a voice in it as well. So I think that is what I'm focusing on right now, trying to include the Arctic youth, and also share the stories, because something that is so common knowledge for me is not common knowledge for everyone. And I think you can always learn from others and you can teach others. And that's something I hope we keep doing. And I hopefully also keep learning about the ACTIC itself. Yeah, that was, I hope, my story, and I hope it made sense.
Luna, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you so much for your activism and for fighting for the climate and for the environment. I love how you said it's people taking action in their own ways in their own environment, and really emphasize that your story and experience may be different from other people's, and that way we can keep learning from each other. Super inspiring. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to move on to our last speaker, BOBBI Rose Coe, who is Untitled, which means people of the headwaters. She was raised in Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories, and now resides in Yukon. She was raised by her grandparents and her community, and starting at a young age, she traveled all throughout Gwich'in County. She found her passion for Gwich'in in the way of life, the culture, the traditions, the values, the stories, the history, and the people, by just being out in the land with her family and friends, where she feels at home, living her best life. Still learning, though she continues to teach what she knows to anyone who wants to learn. Once, while attending a meeting with her grandfathers, BOBBI was encouraged by them to speak for the Gwich'in people, the land, animals, fish, and water, and since then, she has been advocating for environmental issues, especially concerning the Peel River watershed in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So, BOBBI, I'll pass it over to you for the next couple minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Thaw, Gwich'in, and the Kwanlin First Nations here in the Yukon. Maybe I'll do an introduction in my language. To BOBBI Rose Coe, Velji, Untitled Gwich'in, Eatly, Untitled Jakwidget, White Rose Conquitia, Tsutsuk, Hat, Rosemary, Chanslet, Dorothy Alexi, Tsutsi, Hat, Abram Kui, Chanslet, Robert Alexi, Senior. Good morning, like Emma said, my name is BOBBI Rose Coe. I'm a Untitled Gwich'in from Fort McPherson. Right now reside in White Rose. My grandparents are Rosemary and Abram Kui and Dorothy and Robert Alexi, who I was raised by. I would like to thank all the partners for inviting me on this webinar, and to students on ICE for always being so open with their opportunities. I know this webinar, the theme was storytelling, so I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, then I'm going to tell you where I am right now and why I'm here. A few years ago, I was doing some research on my family, and I came along the story of my grandfather. As a Untitled Gwich'in, we're Caribou people. For thousands of years, the Gwich'in have been following the migration pattern of the porcupine caribou herd that is based in northern Canada, flowing through the Yukon. Flowing through the Alaska, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. So way back in the day, in sweet days, like long time ago days, my great-great-grandfather, one of his medicine powers were to know and feel where the caribou was. And because of that, he helped with the survival of my people, and that's why we are alive today. So during his lifetime, he traveled through the Gwich'in region in northern Canada, and it was before he was going to pass. He was asked to go home to Alaska. And on their way home, They said they set their tents and whatnot, and in the middle of the night, all they heard was thousands of caribou going through camp. And obviously the people are not going to get up and get excited to get out there. So when they got up in the morning, there was absolutely no footsteps on the ground of any caribou. And they went to go check on my grandfather, and he had passed. So they say that my grandfather now has spared walks with the caribou, and he's been walking with the caribou for many years. And I wanted to bring that up because without the caribou and without the land and without the water and without the fish, my people in the north wouldn't be here today. And I just want to acknowledge that when I heard Corinne talking, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I was just thinking, wow, Earth changed a lot within like 100 years, like rapidly. And recently it's been climate change has been a really big issue in the north. And this is the second story I wanted to share is of my Juju Bella Alexi. I was listening to her audio for like a year now. I found it, and I'm always so grateful that I get this information, because my grandmother lived up to 105 years old. So in 1980, she did an interview with my uncle, and she was talking about when she was growing up, when she was 12 years old, growing up out on the land and seeing the changes at her age. So this interview was done when she was 88 years old, and she talks about when she was 12. And most of what she talks about is all the adventures that she had within our traditional territory, and all the places that she got to see, all the people that she got to meet. But one of the important things what she talks about is, how the land was so beautiful and how it was so bountiful, and how they didn't have hard times. I think she was talking about a time how they didn't have to worry about food. There was plenty of caribou, and there was plenty of fish, and there was plenty of moose. And she talked about how she was able to drink water right from the river. And at 12, 13, 14, she started seeing the impacts of colonization coming in, and seeing all those different people coming in, and seeing the kind of back then technology that was coming in. And it's kind of weird for me, because when she's doing this interview, she's not talking about too much about the climate, but she's talking about how people were coming in, and she was really encouraging to let people know that as Indigenous people out on the land, we had to learn how to adapt and to move forward in good ways, and being able to go forward and being able to continue to live out on the land. And I just want to say, my Juju, she lived up to 105 years old. She passed away in 1995. And how many years that my people have been living out on the land. And I know she was talking about colonization back then, and now we come forward, and now I'm talking about climate change and how it's impacting our lands. I was, like in my bio in the beginning, Emma talked about I was raised by my grandparents, which I was, thank God, because they taught me a lot and they made me who I am today. Besides my community, Fort McPherson, being raised on the land is like no joke. Being a teenager, I really, I didn't want to be there, but it was just way of our life. And I'm really thankful for that, because right now I get to be able to travel the land, and because of my people and my grandparents, I know different places, and I've been to different places throughout my traditional territory. And being able to travel the land for, I feel like forever, 105 years, I got to see those changes. And I could say within the past 5 years of travel in the Peel watershed, in the headwaters, I've been seeing firsthand the impacts of climate change and how it's changing our traditional territory. And not only that too, I just want to tell people, the impacts that you're making on a daily basis in the South are impacting the North, rapidly. As Indigenous people, we're really adaptive people, but when it's happening at a rapid rate, we're constantly learning new ways of doing things, but also remembering our traditions and culture. So I guess we'll talk about where I am now, and on my bio, it said I'm an Indigenous server guide. I really like being an Indigenous server guide. It's totally I get to be myself and travel to different places throughout the North, and travel out on land for weeks at a time, and be able to meet great people, be able to work with young people, be able to travel to different communities, be able to talk to people, and I guess there's a story behind why I want to be an Indigenous river guide. I guess not only being a river guide, not only I get to be myself, but I get to be able to teach people about the North, teach people about the changes that I'm seeing out on the land, be able to talk about climate change, be able to talk about the issues in the North. But also being able to tell people, that people are living in the North, people like myself and my people are still living out on land, and are still continuing their culture and traditions. And how the land is so important to us. We don't go out on the land for nothing. We go out on the land to harvest. We go out on the land to, make our heart feel better, become healthy, connect to our ancestors, eat good food, and that's super, super important for us. I just want to say, over the last 5 to 20 years, I what Corinne said in her presentation, the land is changing rapidly, and we all see that. And there's stuff, I don't know, I could only say this, so what I believe, there's stuff in the land that's coming out because the permafrost is melting up here, and it's going in our water, and it's going in our animals. And right now there's a high rate of my people getting cancer. Like, my people are dying, like a lot of my elders, a lot of the knowledge holders are, a lot of people who live out on the land, or live that where we have our food that comes from the land all the time. And I don't know if it's the water or the fish, because we live downstream from the Mackenzie to the Athabasca River, where they have the big oil companies up there. So it's kind of frustrating, but I know there's a lot of people working on it. And that's like one of the huge main points that I wanted to say is that, when I say climate change is no joke, it's not no joke. Like, I do what I do because I feel like it's a responsibility, even though I do this and guide or go down the land in different ways, but I continue to make sure that I'm learning as much as I can, and I'm doing as much as I can. And if we don't have people standing behind us, so we don't have people helping us here in the north, I don't know how our future is going to look like. And that's like when I speak, and this is probably like one of the reasons why I speak to. It's like my home, where I get to travel to. But yeah, I just want to, let you know that when we work together, when we have a goal as, as an individual, as a community, as a territory, province, nationally, internationally, like, we all have to work together and like try come up with a strategic plan around sustainable energy, and being able to work within communities and have community champions within our communities. Mentorships are really important. I think one important thing is like working with communities and having them lead. And just keep on being able to have an open heart and open mind, and be yourself, but also like, remember every day that all your actions are impacting the world. That's it.
Thank you very much, Bobby. It's really great to hear your story, and I'm glad you connected it back to people. I think people are left out of the conversation sometimes when we're talking about it and ecology and those dual crises, and it is really important to bring it back to colonialism and climate justice and environmental justice, and really think about the people who are residing in those areas. So thank you very much for sharing your story.
Yeah, well, I think like overall, like, we're all living on this earth, so I think each and every individual should take responsibility on their daily actions, but also remembering that we're not doing this for ourselves today, but we're doing it for future generations. That's what I think about. I think of my children and my great-great-grandchildren, like down the roads, and if 100 years in the future, that 108, like my Juju Bella, who was like an adventurer, who was traveling where I get to travel right now, that my great-great-grandchildren are able to travel the same lands and be able to see the same place, hopefully the way it is right now, because right now it's like, I think it's like one of the beautiful places in on this planet. And it's like, we worked over like 10, 15 years, maybe even longer. I could go back to the 60s, or since our treaties have been signed up, we've been trying to protect that area. So yeah, last year we won a court case with Peel Watershed, and right now it's going through land use plans, so I'm really thankful for that. Oh, that's my 10 minutes. I'm done.
You led us very well into the next segment, which I think will be rapid fire. I want to be mindful of the time since it has been an hour. I do want to try to get to at least one question per participant, per speaker. But also, can every speaker please give us a one-sentence call to action? What can we do to help contribute? Caroline, maybe you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, so the biggest threat to Arctic peoples, the COCH, is the species, and the Arctic landscape is climate change. And the solution for that doesn't lie in the Arctic, but elsewhere. So the entire world needs to like ramp up their ambition and reduce greenhouse gas emissions drastically.
Thank you.
I believe that with my own story of, even though being young and not feeling you have a lot of power, that you have to remember you always have the ability to make a change, even if it's big or small, in your own community or in a global scale. Any kind of positive change is change, and we need to change in order to get through all of this. And just, yeah, focus on your own community and work out from that and adapt to wherever you are. Yeah.
Oh, calls to action. One of the this is really important to me because like over past like 20 years, like we've been trying to get the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge protected. And the Trump administration is not making it easy for us. One thing that I'd like to call to action is for people to go on to arcticrefugedefense.org and sign the petition, write to your politicians. And I think one of the things I was told is talk to the banks who are supporting these big companies, write them letters. Yeah, that'll be really helpful. That'll help me and my people like a lot. Super important. Where the Arctic refuge is, that's where the caribou, that's the caribou cabin grounds. And that's where we call, that's where life began. So if you could go on to arcticrefugedefense.org and sign the petition and write to your politicians, I'd be forever grateful.
Thank you. The question that has received the most attention going into the question section is Ale Garcia said, I'm from Mexico. What can be done specifically from the global south to take action? And I think Bobby already spoke to this, but maybe we can have one more sentence on what you could do specifically from the global south.
I can jump in. Yeah, it's just a big topic, but yeah, like all countries, or most countries, agreed in the Paris Agreement to phase out emissions, like bring the world to net zero, but in the 21st century. So this is something the world has agreed to do. So I think, it's not only individual responsibility or state responsibility, it's responsibility of everybody. So on a personal level, you can look what your carbon footprint is and where you can reduce, and then like your biggest the biggest change you can make is be political and speak to the people in power, and just inspire change. And I guess it's renewable energies, it's change in transportation. It's, I think now also we're like the whole world is transforming with this pandemic, and we are trying out like new things of virtual ways of meeting and coming together in different types of transportation. So I think it's on all levels, like, but the main thing is reducing greenhouse gas emissions wherever you can.
Thank you. We have a question also specifically for Ilona. Is there a big youth climate and nature movement in Greenland like in other parts of the world? And are there local youth groups that people can join?
With the youth groups, I'm not exactly sure, but there is many people that are very passionate about the climate crisis and how we can do for the better. And I know one of my personal friends actually became a politician herself to try to make a change from the inside and out. And we have a lot of passionate young people that have been working on anything from a small scale, from changing your own school and how we work with sustainability. I remember when I was in my old school, we changed from like using plastic cutlery to taking that away. And I think those small changes should count and does count. Down in South Greenland, I know a lot of people that are also very passionate about it and often make on their social media sharing about their visions and their hopes. But with joining a group, I would say it's more on like, for example, with the Arctic Youth Network, and not so specifically to Greenland, maybe. And there is some groups called, for example, Plastic Not So Fantastic, and that is focusing on plastic. And they're doing a great job, and they have won awards and stuff like that, but not specifically for youth. Perhaps something that should be started up, at least not what I know of.
Thank you. And our last question is for BOBBI. What are the most useful things we can do to bring Indigenous wisdom into play in discussions around climate and biodiversity?
Listen to the traditional knowledge holders, listen to the people who work and play out on the land, and speak for the communities. You know, my people have been, well, the Indigenous people around the world have been talking for like years on, like, you know, ways to move forward. And I think only now that people are listening. So, you know, joining these kind of events and listening to people from the north and having their input is like super, super important. I know even for me, for this webinar, I had to like call home and talk to my elders and get their knowledge and support and hear from them. And yeah, I think including and being able to make sure that what they said is like written down and it's being heard and acknowledged.
Thank you. With that, thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Carol, Luna, and BOBBI. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your stories, for your research. It has been such a pleasure talking with all of you. And thank you to everybody who participated in the Slido. It was great to hear your questions. I hope you learned something today, and thank you to everybody who participated and listened today. We will be sending out the recording, so there will be an opportunity to share this with your friends who may not have had a chance to participate today. Thank you so much. Oh, one more thing.
I'm also starting a podcast. So if you want to hear like more Northern voices from the Canada's North, you could look me up on social media, and yeah, it'll be coming out soon.
Amazing. Looking forward to hearing that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, morning, evening. Thank you for participating. And thank you for all of our sponsors who helped put this on today. Bye-bye.
See you.